Welcome to the Coffee Barometer 2026. My name is Serene Anavati. I'll be your host for the next 90 minutes. We're going to explore the past, the present, and the future of coffee sustainability. First, let me thank all of the people that have called in. I know it's an absolute matrix of algorithms, news cycles, World Cup fever, work commitments, family commitments that are all competing for your attention. And the fact that we have some dedicated time for collective reflection around something we care about is special and rare. And it arguably can be considered an act of resistance in the United States these days. The Coffee Barometer is a special report. It is a 20-year reflection. Eight editions have been published, and it's almost like a longitudinal study. It's a collaboration between four organizations: Ethos Agriculture, Solidaridad, Conservation International, and the Vocal Network. Each of these organizations contribute perspectives, relationships, resources to bring the barometer to life. It's an assessment of the progress that has been made in the sector and the challenges that still remain. And it's unique in the sense that it focuses on the people and the places that produce coffee and tries to understand the value distribution and the reasons on how that connects to the organizations that are trading coffee, roasting coffee, and retailing coffee. We have two main objectives of this call. The first objective is to take this document and discuss it, really bring it to life and bring some context, some nuance, and some color to it. The second objective is to inspire all of the listeners to go to thecoffeebarometer.org, download the report, read it, and discuss it with your own colleagues, peers, and friends. To do this, we have designed a session. It's a type of fishbowl facilitation. We have two rounds, and I'm in the fishbowl by myself right now. It's a little awkward, and I'm looking forward to inviting Short in. He will be our first guest, and he's going to give us about a 15-minute presentation on the key insights of the barometer. It's kind of like sprinkling fish food in the fishbowl. And then one at a time, I'll invite in our guests. I'll introduce them, and then they're going to build on Short's insights. And essentially, we're going to create a multi-log. I'll have the first round, and then I'm going to pass it over to our friend from Forum for the Future, Alicia Bagat, and she's going to do a second round, and we're going to discuss the future of coffee. So I guess we'll just get started now. I will first introduce Short. I remember the first time I met Short, actually, just a quick story. It was 2014. I am in Jakarta at a Scopi coffee conference, and I end up sitting next to him. And I'm the type of person that likes to chat with anyone I sit next to, so I end up chatting with Short, and I think to shut me up, he hands me a barometer. And I start reading it, and I was immediately compelled from the type of writing that was in it. It was very candid. It's at a time in which I was writing a lot of sustainability reports, and I was constantly, patting myself on the back or writing it on behalf of corporates and patting themselves on the back for all of the impact that they have achieved through their sustainability programs. And the Coffee Barometer read differently. It was a critique. It had a feeling of journalism from an insider from the coffee sector. And so first, Short, thank you for writing the barometer and sticking to it for 8 editions in 20 years. I know your daughter was born in 2006, and now you have 2 full-grown adults, and you're here now. I'm still bothering you. So welcome to the fishbowl.
Thanks for this great introduction. I also remember you tapping me on the back, and well, as everybody knows, in the coffee sector, when Saurin starts talking, he never stops.
Yeah.
So, that is, it's a true story. Um, indeed, it's great to be with all of you here today to discuss and present the eighth edition of the Barometer, indeed the 20th anniversary. Never imagined that from the first time we started with this report that we would still be working on it and covering the coffee sector, but there's still a lot to say about it, so I'm happy to be around.
Well, first, maybe you could just give us an outline of the bigger picture, some of the headlines that have come out of this edition of the Barometer.
Sure. Well, as we said, like 20 years ago, we started with the idea of the Barometer, very brief report, indeed reflecting upon all the progress that we were making in the sector. But somewhere in my head, I had that feeling like, okay, all companies were claiming progress, but when we were actually in the producing countries, we saw a different reality. And that realization led to, okay, there's an interesting difference between claiming progress and scale, and the scale of the problem and the scale of the challenges that we have in the coffee sector. And maybe we can go to the next slide, or the first slide actually. This is indeed a brief illustration of past editions. I did not include the new one because it's not even on paper anymore. So modern are we now these days that it's just there on PDF, but it has also become quite a long story. So that's also why we decided to keep it just in a digital format. Anyway, it's available for everybody now on our website. It's free. It's based on publicly available information, so you can check all sources and please, be in touch about your point of view, or if you have any better sources, because we still have a lot of questions, and maybe we can immediately go to the next slide, which shows some of those questions. If we look at the coffee sector at large, we often tend to somehow in our discussions talk about coffee producing countries like they're more or less all the same. Of course, the reality is far from that, and only by trying to bring some very basic points in one overview, we end up with this type of country profiling. We looked at the top 10 countries in 2024, more or less, try to figure out how much hectares are dedicated to growing coffee, how much of that coffee is grown in full-grown sun or shadow production models. How many farmers are there involved, and what is the export? What is the actual the demand, or the local demand? And then you get this picture of, well, there's a lot of differences between these 10 countries, and of course Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, Colombia stand out as the big producers. But we also see, like, if you look at Ethiopia, Uganda, Indonesia, that's where the majority of farmers are. And that directly changes your way of thinking, and thinking, okay, where should we be focusing when we talk about poverty? When we talk about the challenges in the different coffee producing countries, because we also know, and we did not include that in this overview, but the living income gap it's only covered in Brazil, it's a bit covered in Vietnam, but most of these other countries, lots of farmers and workers are still working in poverty circumstances, which does not really relate very well with the picture of the coffee sector that we have as a well-oiled machine that brings our coffee to our table every day, and that we are happily drinking. And most consumers do not realize what is the picture behind that cup of coffee. And that is also this overview is it gives us some insights, but it also raises lots of questions, because still a lot of the information I'm sharing here, and we also made that caveat, is it's more or less interpretation. A lot of the information is not like it's not easy to find very accurate data on, for example, the areas dedicated to coffee, or the exact amount of farmers involved in the sectors. I even had to leave out how many workers are there, because we just do not have those figures. But maybe if we go indeed to the next slide, like we within the Coffee Barometer, and also in the last 20 years and all those 8 editions, we've always believed very much in the added value of the third-party certification systems. And we've seen that they managed to build real infrastructure at farm level, and also the credibility towards consumers. However, in recent years, we also see in our figures, and actually I still think we are the only one trying to bring together these type of figures, that somehow these systems have reached the ceiling. And what we will see later in the presentation, there's a shift from third party to second party, and of course there's a lot we can discuss about impact or lack of impact, or whatever is there. But I want to give one very basic idea, is that it doesn't make it easier for us as team behind the Coffee Barometer to say anything about comparability in the coffee sector when we discuss sustainability. Because now we have like a couple of third-party systems that do publish figures, and where we can also find quite some academic impact studies on how they are performing or how they are not performing, what they could do better, versus a multitude of company proprietary systems that have come along in recent years, where it's much harder to actually figure out how to compare those, and what the standards actually mean in practice, what they expect from the farmers, and actually what it delivers at farm level. But anyway, to stay away a little bit of trying to tell the same story over and over in the Coffee Barometer, this time we flipped the script a bit. And instead of actually trying to find the solutions for all of our sustainability challenges at the level of the farm, we thought, is that actually where we will find the solutions? And maybe we can go to the next slide.
Well, thanks for the overview, Sjoerd. And coffee is a tremendous amount of complexity, and a lot of interdependencies between the social, environmental, economic dynamics that are at play. So how do we know that we're focusing on the right things, and identifying the systemic issues that are causing these dynamics to occur?
Yes, that's a question that also crossed my mind. I don't know if I have the answer. At least we have a huge group today, so maybe together we can identify some parts of the answer. But At least what I find intriguing being around in the coffee sector for quite a while is we often have quite heated discussions around what to do at farm level, and then we also tend to have huge ambitions, and then often reality kicks in. Like we can show multiple projects, and we can show a lot of pilots. But the difficulty, and it's still the same like in 2006, is okay, what is the scale? Now, what have we been able to really upscale our efforts, and did that change the dynamics in the producing countries? And for this time, we decided, okay, let's try to follow the money. Actually, if most of the risks in the coffee sector, they end up upstream at the farm level, and the gains end up downstream at the level of the roasters and the retailers, and they tend to make quite a good business out of coffee, but somehow that money is not being reinvested back into the countries of origin, and that was a bit why we looked at that dynamic, and figured out a couple of examples that we are presenting in the barometer. So maybe we can show the next slide. I think that like all our examples draw upon now let's stay at the first slide. Yes, this one. All our examples, they draw upon recent research papers, but we read them maybe with a bit of a different intention, and the intention to see, okay, what is actually a message that we also find in this information. And I think one of the researchers that came out a couple of years ago, I think 23 or 24, was by Basic, on the value distribution of coffee in the German market, and it's a huge study going into detail, very interesting material. But what I more or less took out of it was actually the fact that yes, farmers are underpaid, but farmers tend to be part of an family. That's not for nothing that they are called family farms. And most of that work seems to go unpaid in the calculations that we see in this and that this research is presenting. And in that way, actually, the farming communities are subsidizing because the true costs of their labor remains completely hidden. And I think naming this is really a necessary starting point for changing it, because it's not something we tend to realize in our discussions around sustainability, that with this element, if we overlook this very basic element of unpaid family labor, it will be hardly possible to reach any of our sustainability goals. I think the next slide gives another completely different example, and I think that one is also interesting, because this is a study from Carl Wienold and Peter Roberts, and they analyzed the sustainable transaction, the coffee transaction guide data, and actually found a very intriguing fact that the idea is that specialty coffee somehow, simply put, equals sustainability, because it ends up at a higher price level. But what they found actually was a different picture, because of the fact that farmers have to do more work in sorting, in processing, in traceability, they produce better quality, but they also have higher costs, and those costs are not really remunerated. If you look at what these type of coffee fetch at the consumer level, the farmers still end up with very basic price level. So it's an interesting question that is indeed how can the additional value within specialty actually also be remunerated to the farmers, because now somehow it's not really working. So just to jump to another example, and this is a researcher, Felix Meyer from Austria, and they looked at actually the net financial flows of coffee corporations to shareholders. And as you can see, there are a couple of big ones on the stock market, and they tend to really push billions of dollars actually back yearly towards their shareholders. And without going into all the details, I hope you can have a look at it in the barometer itself. I think this question, the question it raises is how serious can we take a sector and its sustainability discourse if it's actually allocating lots of its capital outside of the coffee sector. It's of course more of an ethical question, but still I think it's a question we should raise within the sustainability discussions, and that's we are currently not doing that. Another example, I do not have a specific slide on it, but it's the question. It's sometimes mentioned, and maybe not only in relation to the coffee sector, but it's tax arbitrage. We cover an example of how actually Starbucks is routing its taxes through Vaud in Canton in Switzerland, and of course, global commodity trading, it's a standard practice. I think all commodity traders have their offices in Switzerland or route a lot of their profits through Switzerland. Again, it's not there's nothing wrong. It's not a legal question, because all these ways of doing it that's there, but again, it's more of an ethical comment on the same comment actually. Like if how can we on the one hand claim sustainability and be committed, while at the same time we try to avoid paying tax in the countries of origin, or shield these countries from redistribution. So it's just what I think what we want to do with the barometer is to bring some different elements to the sustainability discussion at large. There are a couple of more examples how the sector is avoiding risk in the Coffee Barometer, but please have a look.
Sure, there has been a tremendous amount of investment made into coffee sustainability, public-private partnerships, and different types of direct trade certifications, etc. How do we know that collective action is working? Like, what's the problems that we're having in aligning our relationships and resources towards moving the needle in the direction that fills the gaps that you just addressed?
Yes, well, I have probably to disappoint all of you here. We don't know. That is the short answer. I'll try to give the little bit more background, but like all the challenges we are describing, from living income, climate adaptation, labor rights, none of them are things any of the companies involved can fix alone. So there are sector level responses, but what we are missing with the sector level response is actually a sort of a level of accountability. No, like we can make a lot of future looking claims, um, but we still do not have a reliable picture of what the sector at large, in what direction it is moving. We can say something about some individual companies, but still all of these companies still have to cope with these bigger sector challenges. So what we are covering in this current barometer is a brief review of I think what are the main multi-stakeholder initiatives, including the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, the Global Coffee Platform, the ICO's Coffee Public-Private Task Force, and they all have ambitious targets. At the same time, we do see they all depend in their current form. They quite are dependent on public funding. We know public funding is retracting in the sector, and even the ambitious targets that are there are not in line with the scale of funds available at the moment. So the other point, I think what is important to note is that we have the feeling that the agendas of these MSIs are very much dominated by the private sector sponsors, let's call them in that way. And that's not nothing of a bad intention, because there are important topics to discuss, but it doesn't make it's not very easy or simple for organizations that do not have the capacity or funds to be part of these circles or to be represented in the rooms where the decisions are made. No? And then I think my main point or my main criticism here is that all of these MSIs have a sort of architecture for collective accountability, but somehow they do not really apply this to their members. So I really miss some transparency on reporting, and what happens when commitments of collective commitments are not met. So I would have expected more accountability and more insights at that level. And then another expectation that not came true is, I think, like in the last barometer, we expected like all the mandatory legislation somehow to be in place now, but most of it has been postponed with no, let's say a couple of months, but at least some of it will kick in later this year, like the EU deforestation legislation, the CS Triple D. So we do see individual companies, we do see progress, but the regulation establishes the floor. It's not the ceiling, and we see that compliance here is not the same as ambition, and we would have expected some more collectiveness, would I call it, in yeah, on the one hand, the MSIs, and on the other hand, the companies really coming together and really crack these challenges together. Like, okay, how are we going to cope with these regulations? Because what we see now is all these companies going in an individual direction, all with their own traceability systems and tools, and a lot of the headache is pushed towards the farm level again, and I think that is a missed opportunity for the sector. And then maybe last but not least, let's maybe move. Yeah, this is a bit of an overview of who's where in what MSI, but let's go to the next slide, which hopefully says a bit more. Like last time we presented the brew index. This time we wanted to do something different, but because we thought it's in the end it's not about the beauty contest. No, it's not about who's best in class and can claim that they are doing best. In the end, we just want to know some very basic elements, and we this time we asked the 10 main roasters and the 5 main traders. We looked at their policies and then started to link that to our other questions. Okay, what are these companies saying, for example, on living income? And then what are your benchmarks? What volumes are you planning to procure? How, when, and actually we found nothing. We found absolutely nothing in the reporting except of one company, Ofi, that is at least giving a glimpse of the direction it's taking, but none of these other companies that are all discussing living income in the MSI environment and are all pushing for more and more research, that it's still not entering the policies, and I find that quite intriguing because it's not something like it's a new discussion. I think the other one we looked at was, for example, scope 3, like in coffee production. That's where the emissions are. So you would at least expect companies to be fairly clear on their climate adaptation plans and how they are gonna fund this or how they're gonna do this. And from the 15 companies, we only found 6 companies that currently have science-based targets, initiative approved goals. But none of these 15 companies are sharing how they're gonna do or fund the adaptation trajectory. So maybe it's not necessary to share this, but still I find it astonishing that one of the defining issues in the coffee sector is still not at that level being addressed. And then also looking at the time, let's close down. But I think one of the other elements, for example, we could not find any information on, or we could not find any information anymore on what volumes or what type of contracts are there with farmers and specific countries, communities, just to give a bit of an idea. Okay, how are the long-term investments being planned within these companies? Are they really will they be focusing on Vietnam and Brazil, or is there really this move to bring in most of the top, at least of the top 10 countries? But still, we had a hard time figuring that out. And that's, I think, the end of that message is like the intransparency that we show is actually the main insight, and also a little bit disappointment after 20 years of trying to make the sector more transparent. So let's leave it here.
Sure, that's plenty of food for the fishbowl that I think that we can all build on. Before I forget, there is a Q&A function that is associated with this call. So any questions that you have, please put it in that the Q&A, and you can upvote. So essentially vote on the questions that are that you find most interest in, and at the end of the session, we're going to do our best, depending on time, to address those questions. And I'd also like to just mention, when I was reading the barometer, this last barometer, what I thought was quite interesting was you did a timeline, and during that timeline, it gave me a chance to reflect on my own career. I could start remembering the places that I was living in, the projects I was working on, the organizations I was working for. My coffee career actually started in Uganda in 2009. And anyone that has followed Uganda has seen them have like almost an incredible rise in the coffee sector, becoming, I believe, the largest exporter of coffee out of Africa. And another star of Uganda is our next guest. He's actually a success story that came from the international coffee development. First worked for Lutheran World Relief, which I've worked with in the past. They're an excellent team and an excellent program. And through that exposure to the reality of coffee cooperatives, he created a hybrid model. His social enterprise is called Mountain Harvest, and anybody that has been following the Ugandan coffee sector has most likely heard his name over the past few years. His name is Kenneth Badaje, and I welcome him into the fishbowl with us. Hello, Kenneth. How are you, my friend? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry
Down
about
there,
that.
you.
Yes.
No worries.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, especially talking about this conversation, important conversation about the barometer. It's an interesting opportunity to see the world moving to talking about sustainability as a compliance issue, to start looking at how do we talk about the economics of coffee. It's exciting for me and important for Mountain Harvest. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here with us. I would say that Uganda, Rwanda, they're sometimes discussed as being these success stories in coffee sustainability. And you yourself could be considered a success story in that has come out of international development and coffee. Could you tell us a little bit about the impact that the sustainability movement has had on the rise of the Ugandan coffee sector, and perhaps, what is kind of what is your opinion on where you're at now?
Thank you, Soren, for the question. First of all, I start by acknowledging that huge change, especially for Uganda. We have seen over the past 10 years a change on our reputation. We are now known as not only a volume producer, but even consistent quality. We've moved from about 3 million bags to now about 8 million bags. And this has happened in less than 10 years. But to respond to your question, I think it is more than sustainability. It is sustainability initiatives combined with a number of other factors that I'm going to briefly talk about. They start with farmers' own resilience, to government leadership, to investment by the private sector, including multinationals. So I think sustainability has been an important part of that broader transformation agenda. The key factors that has contributed to our country's rise in the coffee sector, I think there are about 6. The first one, and probably the most important one, has been government leadership working with the private sector. Around 2017, our leadership, our country, and our president took a deliberate effort to set a national ambition. The president challenged the sector that we should hit 20 million bags. We had been producing about 3 million bags for over 40 years, and that he had actually set around 2020. Now, by defining a deliberate national ambition under what we called that time the Uganda Coffee Roadmap, the government provided leadership, provided investment to increase productivity, to improve farmer incomes, to strengthen farm organizations, knowing that our coffee is grown by smallholder farmers, expanding value addition, improving access to planting material and the quality of the planting material, increasing access to finance all this, and lastly, building a structured demand outside Uganda for our coffee. So that clear government roadmap and government vision guided the private sector to start investing in coffee. The second was about rehabilitation of the aging coffee farms. About 7 years ago, the average coffee tree in Uganda was about 40 years. That coffee tree came with declining productivity. But by training farmers and investing in stamping, pruning, gap filling, rehabilitation of the neglected coffee farms, we started seeing massive change in the yield per tree. For the farmers that Mountain Harvest works with alone, we saw a change of about 60%. So even just by taking care of the old coffee tree, we were able to double the volume that we are exporting. The third is around the planting material and the research investment. So the government invested through the Ministry of Agriculture into the National Coffee Research Institute and focused on multiplication and distribution of flea, disease-resistant, and high-yielding varieties, especially starting with Robusta. So massively farmers were receiving, and when I say farmers, including even the commercial farmers, we are receiving flea seedlings at their gardens at the cost of the government. And this strongly contributed to the change and the rise that we are seeing. Fourth, there is a strong extension system that has supported smallholder farmers to be educated on the appropriate practices on the farm, which has been an investment through the government systems, extension systems, alongside the extension systems of the multinationals and other SMEs based in Uganda. But I think what was critical here is that the government provided specific guiding handbooks so that all our efforts were towards promoting the same practice. The fifth was an outcome of the demands of certifications, sustainability certifications. So there has been an increase in interest in organic certified coffees, and that has brought alongside, has promoted practices that allow regenerative agriculture. So practices like mulching, composting, manure production and use. And remember, these, as an alternative to other chemical fertilizers, for example, and pesticides, are easy for the farmer to invest in because they are materials that are around their households. Lastly, it has been around quality improvement and structured market access. When the government invested in increasing heavily the productivity per acre, the private sector, including the multinationals, started now investing in central processing facilities. Before that, Uganda was only doing farm-processed coffees, which came with poor quality and inconsistent quality. But now you started having the multinationals, the companies like Mountain Harvest, the cooperatives investing in central processing stations, which allowed us to get good quality coffee. And linked to that, we started investing in heavy marketing, including commercial diplomacy, where our embassies are representing and attracting producers like us to go into these cities. Now, however, I think one of the messages that I take from the Coffee Barometer is that we should be careful not to confuse sustainability activities with sustainability outcomes. Therefore, in my opinion, we should be asking one important question. Are these gains that we are seeing in Uganda translating into stronger livelihoods and stronger businesses for the farmers? Because I think that's what matters. At Mountain Harvest, we see directly that better quality leads to better prices. When the farmer understands sustainability and certification, it's not about the certification. It's not about the standard. It's about the income they are going to get. So Uganda's potential is much higher. That if we started financing the farmer, rewarding the farmer to be able to benefit from sustainability investments, then we would even see, just for Uganda, an increase towards the 20 million bags that the president said. Now, as I come to my conclusion, I've been reflecting on the gap that the barometer is bringing to our attention. The expectations that we normally place on farmers, especially when it comes to sustainability, any new compliance, any new standard, it's the farmer that we expect to invest in, and the resources that are available for the farmers to invest in. We must start talking about how do we finance these expectations. If we need sustainability initiatives alone, how do we put in place proper financing and market reward systems so that the farmer, who is the investor, is able to benefit from the investment that the entire sector is expecting? I think Uganda, Solene, is the living case study of the question that we are talking about, and we must start building systems that help all of us thrive, and not systems that simply generate better sustainability reporting or make the consumer feel good, but systems that reward all the investment in the entire value chain. Thank you.
Well, Kenneth, thank you so much for sharing this. And, I think you're really becoming a leader, not just in Uganda, but for the entire region of East Africa. And your insights are so relevant to this conversation. And I'm so happy really to hear about the progress Uganda is making. It's the country that I truly fell in love with in East Africa. It's the first country in East Africa that I lived in. And when I was there, I had the pleasure to work alongside our next guest, who at the time was leading coffee research for IITA. I believe it's the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. He is a true systems thinker, and he was kind enough to mentor me in a lot of ways, not just in agriculture systems, but really helping, and not just with me, but his entire team and anyone he works with, to help see the connections between what's happening in the field and the dynamics that happen in the market. He is currently the head of coffee research for Olam International, and also supports their sustainability program as well as corporate sales. So I would like to invite in the next fish to the bowl. Hello, Pete. How are you?
Hi, Soren. Nice to hear you, and happy to be in your colorful fishbowl. It's really it's an honor, and thanks also, Sjoerd, for already sharing your insights. Really very useful.
Well, Pete, we see this constant gap, I guess you can call it, between the intentions of the sustainability movement and the realities of procurement. Could you help us understand why that gap exists?
The gap between, sorry, can you repeat?
The gap between kind of a bit of what Sjoerd was mentioning and Kenneth, the gap between the intentions of the sustainability movement and where we should be as a coffee sector, and the realities of procurement in the field.
Yeah. No, I think that of course, we've had some benefits of prices going very high, right? So that helped many farmers, at least to make temporarily a better income. What we do see, of course, is that as you indicated earlier, right, the risks, of course, are often more with the farmer and less so, with the consumer-facing brands. I would have to say, actually, by the way, that traders also have faced quite a bit of risk during these price peaks, and as you might know, a few traders also went bankrupt and out of business. But yeah, I think that gap, is still there, and unfortunately, we also see there is that, I think what Sjoerd was showing in his graphs, right? He showed that a lot of coffee comes from Brazil, from Vietnam, of course, part of Colombia. And there also we see that a lot of farmers have become increasingly more efficient. You know, the level of intensification and mechanization has gone up. The cost of production relative to the price has come down, and farmers there, right, have been largely investing. If you now go to Brazil, you'll find the expansion, you know, year on year of colonial. You'll find more and more Arabica farmers, you know, investing in irrigation. They're reducing their cost of production, you know, in terms of per ton. And so in the end, right, as we go forward, you do see that, you know, production and also procurement gravitates to the more efficient farmers. And I think that also, you know, makes it easier to go there, right? The coffee is available, it's cheap, it's reliable, and it's fully compliant, right? With EUDR in many cases, with CS Triple D and living income. So I do believe, right, that there is also a market reality which is there, which just basically allows you to buy coffee and good quality coffee, fine, you know, in places where you wouldn't have any sustainability issues and farmers are having a good income, right? Having said that, there is also a large number of, well, an increasing numbers, I would say, of our customers, right, that see that long-term supply chain, particularly for higher qualities Arabicas, whether that is from East Africa or even Robustas, right, higher qualities, or from Central America or Latin America, that there, of course, they would need to invest in these supply chains, right, to make sure that they would keep these high quality coffees, let's say washed Arabicas, for example, you know, for their consumers, right? So we do see there, you know, that farmers are actually, or sorry, customers are, you know, investing with us in trying to build long-term supply chain relationship with these farmers, right? And try to see to what extent we can help and invest, build that longer term relationship, you know, and of course have that trust go two ways, right? Because we also see sometimes, and we've seen that also during the price peak, right? That, yeah, you know, you can fix a volume and a price with the farmer, which is attractive for them because that de-risks them. And then, you know, end of the season, you know, it's time to go there and collect the coffee and maybe, you know, get back some of your investment, some of the credit that you provided. And then, you know, the farmer says, "Oh, no rain," and you're like, "How is that? Everybody got rain. How did you not get rain?" But of course, selling, you know, side selling, of course, would sometimes be more profitable. So I want to say, you know, that yeah, it's a challenge to close that gap. But there is actually quite many different angles to that story. So I don't know, Soren, if you still want to respond to that and throw me another challenge.
No, I mean, first of all, you and I, we could speak all day, but regretfully, we are having to just continue to build on the pieces that you just mentioned. And in doing so, I'll invite in the next guest. She's really had an absolutely beautiful career that has taken her to Asia, Latin America, Africa, and always focusing on the power dynamics and the questions of themes like living income with respect to small scale producers. So the ones that are typically taking on the most risk, they are the largest percentage of producers in the coffee sector. And that is really, I think, driving her passion for activism. She is a lead contributor to the Coffee Barometer, works with the Vocal Network, and is also a Buddhist practitioner. So she's bringing a lot to this conversation. Ashley, welcome.
Thank you, Soren. And thank you for having me also to the other guests and Sjoerd with Ethos. I'm really humbled to be here on this call and to have been a contributor on this round of the Coffee Barometer, as I've been engaged with this publication as a reader and an audience for quite some time.
Well, thank you for being here. And I know that you've worked for IDH and you've supported the development of public-private partnerships and participated in multi-stakeholder initiatives. And what role do they play in addressing kind of this value distribution issue associated with the risk that small-scale producers take in terms of the coffee supply chain versus the reward that seems to not be in countries of origin?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I want to take this a few ways and reflect a little bit about, the generic public-private partnership and also kind of the multi-stakeholder initiative environment that we see. Because we are lucky in coffee compared to some other sectors where public-private partnerships and development finance and multi-stakeholder initiatives actually do exist. In other sectors, they don't. So I think what we've really seen in terms of progress and helpfulness and connectivity is that these partnerships and spaces have really enabled us to have clarity on the fact that there is a value and risk distribution problem, that we see that it is inequitable and who is really benefiting and who is not, as has already been stated on this call. And when we think about living income gaps, which is a central discussion around the smallholder farmer perspective, that we recognize and we can now really agree because we have collective data sharing on the size of gaps for most smallholder farmers outside of Vietnam and our larger farmers and maybe some of the smaller farmers in Brazil. So we're able to have clarity that there's a challenge here related to risk and reward, and we are able to see the distribution of that. We speak about that pretty openly and honestly in the sector. But unfortunately, as has already been mentioned, this has really this has not turned into the closure of living income gaps. And a part of that reason is because, one, we don't really honor the interrelationship between living income, worker rights and protection, and the environment. So in some places where we actually have closed living income gaps, we see large issues with our environmental resourcing, our water tables, and our forests. And on the other hand, where gaps are closed for living income, we also see issues around wage workers. So I would like to not put away the areas where we have small living income gaps and recognize that all of these issues are interrelated. Now, another way to think about interrelationships is who is responsible for making a change to this equitable value and risk distribution, and who has the power to really change it. And what I'd like to speak on briefly is in the public-private spaces and in our multi-stakeholder spaces, I recognize an experience of cognitive dissonance at the individual and the collective level, where we can all get together and read a lot of the reports that are summarized in the Coffee Barometer, as well as this beautiful 20-year reflection that we share back about sustainability and where we are. And many of us actually know what's going on and what's reported in these reports, but we are not able to really critically make a change in our spaces and within our organizations. And a part of that is because we are obscuring the deep interdependencies that I talk about related to social, environmental, and economic issues. And we're also really not honoring the deep interdependencies of core business practice, core policy trajectories, and mandating change, and financial and investment behavior. So after living in Rwanda for many years, also South Africa and some other countries, the concept of Ubuntu really has a strong manifestation within me. And that is this concept of I am because we are, and that we can't function outside of a system. And I'm not sure that we're really showing up into our public-private partnerships and in our multi-stakeholder environments with an honesty and clarity around each of our own institutions and organizations' responsibilities and opportunities to maximize that. The report, the Coffee Barometer, embeds a lot of these insights. We can think about the corporate aspect with Pete, which Pete brings up. Yes, we had short-term price highs recently, but at last year's Swiss Coffee Trader Association meeting in Geneva, I heard that traders are really stressed and they need empathy because it's a very stressful period, and that farmers should be blacklisted for side selling. But I found that very interesting that the empathy seemed to stop at the trader experience rather than extending towards liquidity and what the corporates can do to actually support farmers to be prepared and to reinvest. We see really well-intentioned policies coming out of the EU related to deforestation, related to corporate responsibility. But sometimes these are limited in their construction, and they actually put more risk onto the smallholders and others that they're technically trying to protect alongside managing their own consumption demand. We see wealthy nations, as Short has mentioned, related to tax policies. We saw on the bag of coffee, the German tax. We hear from Swiss trade tax arbitrage. These are normal ways of doing business in wealthy nations and among companies that leak and take and a lot of the value without actually putting it where it's needed. And a few of our speakers have talked about the investment gap that we have, but the money is there. Donors also fall into the trap of funding projects and little silos on the margins of where we really need to intervene, rather than really being bold and courageous in funding what is absolutely needed to change core business and policy. So there's much more that we can say here, but I think really when we're elaborating on the role of multi-stakeholder initiatives and public-private partnerships, it's really necessary and critical that we see that these actions, behaviors, investments are infused with real ownership across stakeholders to really dive into what their own responsibility and possibility is, and to change their behavior. And I know that requires some vulnerability and courage. We also need transparency and accountability at the individual and the collective level. And we mean that across procurement behaviors, policy, and finance to really go beyond the small projects on the margins. And we need tangible and genuine inclusion of critical civil society as well as smallholders into these spaces, because frankly, these partnerships and initiatives are designed with inclusion. That is a part, or exclusion, excuse me. Part of the design of these spaces is inevitably and deeply actually exclusionary. So with that, I really call on everyone to be critically reflective and have some wise discernment about where we focus our attention in the future, so as not to be focused on manageable technical solutions, but really raise the bar on what we can really achieve. And while that takes time to transform ourselves and our systems, let's hope that we have some mandatory policies from our policymakers that critically interlink not only what Kenneth was saying from Uganda and origin, that enable boost in volumes and at national level, but that really integrate the sustainability issues that we're talking about relating to living income, living wages, forced labor, child labor, and the protection of our environment. So we have a healthy, thriving environment, because we don't want to. There's an English or American proverb that talks about cutting your nose off to spite your face. I think we all have to remember we are all deeply interdependent and in this together. And if we don't take our own responsibility, we're also harming ourselves, not just a different actor.
Oh, Ashley, very well, very well said. And I really appreciate first how you were able to pull in the different perspectives from the fishbowl, but also how you're connecting the transactional nature of the coffee sector with the technical aspect of coffee sustainability with the relational. And I think bringing those three pieces together is important for us to understand how we can collectively move in the right direction. This brings us to our final guest that we're going to invite in. He's kind of like a godfather in specialty coffee and has had just an incredible career. He served as the executive director for the SCA, the Specialty Coffee Association, really putting it on the global map as a key trade show that is promoting specialty coffee, and has been a champion of coffee sustainability, has been an advisor to the IDH and to the ICO. If I had a soundtrack to invite him into this conversation, it would be Jaws, because we're gonna bring in now Rick Reinhardt. How are you, Rick?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for asking. Thanks for inviting me. And then thank you to everybody who's made their comments so far, because there's so much to glean from people's perspectives, not only about the barometer, but about the coffee value chain as such.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for being here. Just quickly for all the people that are listening, it is 6 in the morning, and Rick has been up since probably 4:30 in the morning. So we really just appreciate you being here with us and sharing your wisdom. You know, when we discuss sustainability, how important is it for us to understand the influence of the past that has brought us to this point?
Yeah, I think in the human condition generally, and certainly in the case of coffee and smallholder agriculture more broadly, it's critical to think about how we got here, not just where we are and not just where we would like to get to, but how we got to the place we are. And without having a pretty clear understanding of how we got here, and a real willingness to have some self-reflection about our engagement with the sector, we won't be able to develop anything that looks like a real solution to the problems that we face collectively. So I've said often, and I will say again, and at the risk of beating a dead horse, that it's incredibly important to understand that the roots of the coffee trade are really, really colonial in nature. And I have often suggested to folks that the coffee marketplace is not failing. It's actually succeeding at nearly 100% in achieving the goal that it set out to achieve. And that goal really was, how do we exploit free land and nearly free labor in such a fashion that we can transfer the maximum amount of wealth from the site of that free land and labor to effectively the global north, which started out this whole colonial enterprise. And the machine has had a couple hundred years to get very, very, very efficient at this. And the machine that is the coffee value chain, with all its actors, most of them very well intentioned, has managed to create a scenario in which we're extraordinarily good at making that transfer of wealth. And we're very extraordinarily good at resisting anything that would slow down that transfer of wealth in any kind of meaningful way. And look, I didn't colonize anybody, but I spent my career in coffee. And part of the reason that I was able to enjoy that career in coffee is because that colonial beginning has persisted into the very roots and structure of how the industry behaves. So it's critical that we remember that, and we need to take the responsibility for not only acknowledging that, but trying to understand how the fundamental architecture of the system needs to change in order for us to make meaningful change and progress towards our sustainability goals. I would add that were two really key takeaways from my first pass at this year's version of the barometer. The first one, the authors call out very clearly, which we have regressed into a place where most of the transactional nature, not only of coffee trading, but the transactional nature of so much of civil society today, has been reduced to a very antiquated sort of those who have power win kind of terms. So the execution of strength, not only in the social political world, but in the day-to-day efforts in the coffee industry. So the biggest bargaining power at the table walks away with the largest share of the spoils. We can see that's been persistent for a long time. There was a point in my career where I thought people were coming to grips with that, but it seems to have reversed almost completely over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's an environment in which we can't have success. If the biggest appetite at the table always gets to eat first, then we'll never change anything. So the next critical piece of confronting those issues is understanding that we can't operate outside of what Ashley mentioned, the Ubuntu concept of I am because we are. It's incumbent on all of us to recognize that and to play the role of an equal participant with everyone across the board. I would say that the colonial roots of coffee have persisted in leaving certain actors more and more and more powerful across the entire dynamics of the chain, and we've done precious little to reverse that. The only meaningful reversal I've seen really has been that, it goes against every bit of my life experience to say this, that the multinationals, the traders, have probably been the ones who have given up the most in terms of their power, their bargaining power at the table. I think that the retailers have done a great job of squeezing the traders down to the end of their financial rope. Sadly, the traders have had to react, or have chosen to react in the way that one might expect. They turned and squeezed the producers down to the end of their rope. So it's the last dog to be kicked is the producer. The other thing that I saw that, and you flagged it very clearly, is that labor, familial labor in particular, goes unrewarded in the smallholder approach to not only coffee production, but to all kinds of smallholder activity. And there's no cost of labor sort of factored in on a meaningful basis to what the actual cost of the prime material is. And this is a clear manifestation of how capitalism has to pursue efficiency. The goal of the capitalist model is to get more and more efficient in cost of production. And in activities like agricultural production, the number one cost by far is the cost of labor. And all that the sector can do is try to find increasingly less expensive labor. The reaction of the sector has been to see the exit of highly capitalized larger entity farms and the push to a poorly capitalized and nearly powerless smallholder sector. I would say that the test for the beginnings of success in changing that dynamic are very simple. You can look to coffee farming or to any farming activity in any location, and if it's not attracting capital and it's increasing the number of smallholders, then it's failing. If coffee farming was a good business, I promise you that some of that money that went back to shareholders in the coffee sector would have gone towards farming. It would have been invested in farming. But coffee farming, like most subtropical agriculture carried out by smallholders, is a horrible business. So it's not invested in by people who hold capital. The middlemen have to make capital investments because they have to do the further processing, they have to do the logistics, they have to keep the chain alive. But you don't see anybody buying a new farm and trying to make a go of it. In fact, you'd largely see the reverse. Notable exceptions, obviously, in Brazil, where I think we've got a completely different model. It's got some structural advantages that aren't apparent in the rest of the coffee value chain. So the last thing I would say is that we won't change the sustainability outcomes until we change our perspective on how participants are entitled at the coffee value chain. I look at it today, it's as though I invited all of you, all 500 of you, over to my home for a dinner, but I insisted on only cooking the dishes that I like the best, insisted that I sit down and eat first while you watched, and that I insisted that I would limit your portions so that I might have some leftovers to feed to my other friends on another date. This is not a model that can work. We all have to come to the table together, and each of us has that endowed with that human right to be able to eat, to have shelter, to live, to pursue our own evolution up the scale of self-realization. Nobody has a greater right than anybody else. Each of us as individuals have those rights in equal measure. What we don't have in equal measure is the power to execute on them.
Rick, we can obviously feel that you're speaking from the heart and from a lot of experience. I just want to thank all of you for this first round, and I know that we're running a bit late, but we're going to try to get as much into the next round as possible. Right now, I am going to invite all of the listeners into the fishbowl with us. There's a small poll that you can take that just outlines some of the key influences that you think are going to impact the future of coffee. And as you're taking that poll, I will also transition to my co-moderator, Alicia. She works with Forum for the Future, and she is going to do another round and provide some kind of provocative prompts on how we can imagine what the future of coffee might look like. So, Alicia, the fishbowl is yours.
Great. So I'm going to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about what we're going to do here. And I would say we're transitioning now based on time from fishbowl to frying pan. So you're going to be a little bit in the hot seat as we go through these questions and conversations. So I'm Alicia. Thank you for having me on this call and being part of this process. It's been really interesting. I represent Forum for the Future. We're a global sustainability organization, and we use futures and systems change thinking to help organizations with complex challenges. So while I don't work directly on coffee, it has been great bringing in my expertise and previous work on other value chains into looking at the barometer and where we've gotten so far. So I wanted to kind of start out with thinking about exactly that, futures and looking at complex problems and taking that futures lens to the barometer, which really is this retrospective of the past 20 years in coffee, and thinking about, scenarios, one of the bread and butter tools of future study. So how might we use scenarios to think about possible and probable futures? And so when I look at the world today and some of the issues mentioned in the barometer and in sort of the wider macro context, we really have this perfect storm of factors. So, one of the impetuses for having this session was we don't want 20 years to pass. And 20 years from now, we're writing the coffee barometer and it's kind of saying the same things that we've been saying. Hopefully, we are going to make traction on these issues, but kind of where are we today and where do we want to go? So right now we are kind of in a perfect storm. There is climate instability and that is growing. As many folks, including Ashley and Rick, talked about power imbalances. Kenneth talked about this too. So not enough money and too much risk at origin, as well as the power imbalances of the system. Geopolitical volatility, so we've all seen kind of the impacts of the Strait of Hormuz crisis and the war, as well as rapid tech. And I saw that in the comments, the impact of AI and related technological developments on the sector. So a lot of work is happening, but yet this kind of macro storm is creating a scenario in which we are constantly sort of having to respond, and it kind of feels sometimes that what we're doing is needing to grow not incrementally anymore, but in a kind of transformative way. Next slide. So this is an attempt at the beginning of a vision of what could the future be. So another use of scenarios is think about our preferable futures. So where do we want to go, and where's all this work headed towards? What would it feel like to live in a future 10 years from now in which we have achieved many of the issues we're setting out to achieve and solve some of these problems? So the coffee sector would have regenerative ecosystems. economic empowerment? Would there be market accountability as part of that preferred future? I think so. Would tech be inclusive and used to amplify local knowledge and build resilience? And very importantly, unified collective action. So replacing fragmented efforts with large-scale cohesive initiatives that can really take those sustainability forward in leaps and bounds. So keeping that in mind, both the crisis of the present and the hope of the future, I'm going to turn to ask these hot seat questions. So my first question is to go back to Sjord, and to think about, now that we've talked about that and looking to the future, if you were to be writing the Coffee Barometer in 2035, what would be the key headline of that Coffee Barometer?
Yes, a big if. But that aside, I would think hopefully it can only be 10 pages, only about all the successes that we have made collectively. To get there, I think you mentioned here unified collective action. I think that is a key element where the direction we really need to move into, because until now in our discussions we have been claiming that sustainability is a pre-competitive field, but actually the opposite has been true in the last 20 years. It's a highly competitive field, and I think the illustration of what happened with the pressure of the regulatory pressure that's coming up, all companies in the end choosing their own type of solutions, while this was exactly the moment in time where we could get together under the umbrellas that we already have created and really figure out how to move the sector forward. And again, I think it's in 2035. It shouldn't be about any of the individual companies anymore. It really should be about the coffee sector at large has become a sustainable sector where all involved can prosper and really have a sustainable, a resilient future. So yeah, it will be a very short story, I hope.
Only 10 pages. I love that.
The first one was only 16, so it's
less to report on and more success stories. Moving to Kenneth. So in that positive future of 2035, let's imagine that part of that report that Sjord is writing in 2035 involves a world in which coffee farmers are capturing the majority of value in the coffee sector. Do you see that as possible? And also, what might that look like if you think that it could occur?
Thank you, Alicia. I do think that it is going to be possible. When I think of, let's say, 10 years from now in 2035, I see a value chain where there is a clear interconnection of the value chain actors, where the value chain actors are now respecting the roles that each one is playing. Because I see a point 10 years from now where coffee production is reducing because of climate pressures and population pressures and availability of alternative activities to be on these pieces of land. So the farmer will be more respected. I see farmers running profitable agricultural businesses instead of people claiming we are giving you a higher price. I see better quality coffee that is coming with the reward. And I think most importantly, because I have started seeing a change now, even with what the barometer is challenging us to do, I see a future where we are changing the language. So I'm seeing a future where we are talking less about, for example, living income, but about value distribution. And in my own opinion, I see the pathway to living income is profitability. So I hope in that point, in 10 years from now, we will be talking about farmer profitability. We will be talking about value sharing instead of value extraction. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. That's great. Pete, moving to you, I think that's a great point that you just made about kind of the climate realities impacting production and what that's going to look like 10 years from now. So, and then Rick touched upon kind of the existing system that we're inheriting around coffee. So, Pete, my question to you is, if you were to be kind of really remaking the coffee system for a 2-degree warming world, what would be radically different about it? So given the climate realities of the future, what do you see as kind of being inherently changeable and desired to change within the system?
I mean, my question back to you first, Alicia, would be, would you want to maximize, number of farmers, benefiting, or would you want to maximize coffee productivity and supply chain for the world?
I don't know. I mean, why don't you give me the
okay,
short
why I'm saying
either?
this, I know that we have the narrative, right, of that all the farmers should be doing agroforestry and smallholders, and I think this is absolutely true. As we build, resilience, I think diversification, agroforestry is really part of the equation. But what we do see is an increasing shift, towards irrigated coffee. So all the colonial in Brazil irrigated, right? All the Robusta in Vietnam hand irrigated, at flowering. So what we do see is already, and Vietnam and Brazil now currently, right? They will probably be doing more than 100 million bags this year. So they do 55 maybe percent, of the global production. What you do see is that the people that invest in irrigation, obviously, that is the way forward, right? It's not about 2 degrees temperature. It's all about, mitigating drought stress, avoiding drought stress. We were running a farm in Bahia where it was on average 36 degrees at flowering with days of 39 and days of 33. We had more than 5 tons of green bean equivalent per hectare per year in some of our pivots, but just because it was irrigated. So technically, the climate change is not going to be the issue. The issue is going to be when droughts are coming, who has the capacity to financially, bounce back, and who has the technical capacity to deal with that. And unfortunately, I think, that's where you would say you would need to have farmers to get more access to irrigation. But in the steepest parts of Mount Elgin or Colombia, that's very difficult. And so, in the end, I think what we have to do as a sector is try to understand, in which landscape, with what kind of farmers, can we bring what type of solution? I don't think there is a problem with global supply and global volume. There are the investments already. As I'm saying now, right? There is an El Nino coming. People are talking about it. Some farmers in Brazil would be saying, oh, is there an El Nino coming? Good, thumbs up, right? Because we'll have another price spike and Brazil will be benefiting from it. So that's just a little bit a reality check, right? Of what is happening with part of the farmer community that is intensifying and thus increasingly part of the volume. But I do think, of course, it's important for us to help the smallholder farmers and make them more resilient. Of course, agroforestry, small-scale irrigation, adaptive varieties, insurance, long-term supply chain commitments, helping farmers, when there is a bad year. I think that's the package of solutions that we need for the smallholders.
No, I think that's right. And I think that, like with many things and with change, we need to figure out ways in which we can create resilience as well as transition people sooner rather than later, and figuring out where those areas that are going to be vulnerable and able to transition, and where might we have to think about other solutions that preserve livelihoods that maybe aren't in coffee. And those are difficult conversations to have, and I realize that. Ashley, a quick one around collective agency and what collective agency you see as this group having on the call. I think that I saw in the questions that people were very responsive to your talk and asking you to kind of put more energy towards the collective agency piece.
Thanks, Alicia. I know we're pretty much out of time, so I'm going to keep it really short. I think it's really important for us. I want to call in our most courageous selves and ask us all to have our own reality check with the inner cognitive dissonance that we are all sitting with, knowing how this sector works and knowing what we need to get where we want to go. This requires internal courage. This requires us to confront big emotions, maybe like grief, maybe like frustration, maybe like helplessness. And it requires us to hold hands together and to recognize that we need to call in each other and to work together on the solutions. But that means honoring the real problems and the real solutions, and that we can let go of our old habit energies, these colonial extractive approaches, and admit that these are not natural laws. These are choices and decisions that are made and remade every single day in every single transaction and in every relationship. And we do have the power to confront them, and we can have the courage and bravery to hold each other accountable on that journey.
Thank you. And Rick, I had a question for you, but I want to actually just give you the floor to make closing remarks, because I think that you can bring us home.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. Ashley, all the applause for that. One of the things that I wanted to reflect on is, what's the 2035 and beyond future look like as the pressures mount on coffee if we don't act, if we don't do something meaningful. And Pete noted that, hey, we'll probably have enough coffee for the people who want to buy coffee. And that's likely to be true. Although I believe that Brazil and Vietnam can produce a lot of coffee, 100 million plus bags this year, but not an infinite amount of coffee. I don't know that the joint capacity of the top 3 producers is 200 million bags, which is what the demand would likely be at that point. So there's some finite limit. There's some upper bound where how much coffee we can produce. And there's also the change in power dynamics there. The saying in the trade has long been, the cure for high prices is high prices. And there's some reality in that. What we don't hear very often is that the cure for low prices is low prices, because it's just not true, in spite of our best hopes that that would be true. But I can foresee a future in which, rather than being price takers, producers are price makers, because the producers are consolidated in just a handful of countries who have the economic resources, the political strength, and the will to test the upper bounds of what people will pay to continue their coffee consumption. And then, as a last thing, let me just say that coffee is a unique thing. It's a non-nutritive food crop. It's a modest at best central nervous stimulant. Yet it's been front and center in the collective psyche of so many of us. It has fomented rebellion. It has been the engine that powered change. It's been a critical part of entering into adulthood, into the workforce, into education, into responsibility for so many of us for so long. And it adds some value to our lives. If you become a coffee drinker, you rarely stop being a coffee drinker. You're a coffee drinker for life. It adds something to our life. And I'm not sure what it is, but I know some other things that add to our lives that I'm not sure what it is. Music, art, love, the embrace of a loved one. All those things add value to our life. And I'm not sure how, but I would hate for them to go away. And I feel very much the same about coffee. I would hate for it to go away.
Thanks, Rick. And yeah, I think that's kind of speaks to one of the tensions of, like, is the future of coffee to become an elite beverage that only some people can access? Is it part of our collective human psyche that people will be able to access for, fair prices that are shared equitably around on the value chain? Where is it? And I think we all are here because we really value it and want to see it have a thriving, just, regenerative future in the years to come. So thank you for those quick comments. I really appreciate it. And over to Soren to conclude.
Thank you, Alicia, for that round of moderation. I know that we're all tight on time and we have run over, but I just want to thank all of the guests. You've all provided such great perspectives and really brought the barometer to life. We regretfully cannot get into the Q&A, but we are going to answer these questions and respond via email for all the people that signed up during for this webinar. I don't know if we have a chance to just quickly look at the poll and the results of the poll just for our own interests. And we can see from the poll, I cannot, that what is artificial intelligence was the number one factor that would have the greatest influence on sustainability in the next 10 years. And I'm hoping that, the artificial intelligence is not going to be writing the next barometer, but it will still come from our experiences by being close to the people that produce coffee, being close to the landscapes that are part of the identity of those coffee producers. And I feel that these types of conversations that we're having today, and hopefully conversations that people will have after they download the barometer, are ways in which we can really align our values, our skills, our relationships, and our resources towards a more sustainable coffee future. So thank you all again, and we will be in touch via email with the responses to your Q&A questions. And thank you all for participating in this session. Have a wonderful day.